He thought he could climb the same fence forever, laughing at complaints and brushing off warnings, until one humiliating moment changed the balance of power on the entire block. Would you let a stranger climb into your backyard, over and over again, as if your property meant nothing? That's the question Elvin Smith kept asking himself on long evenings after work. He had moved to Boston, Massachusetts, expecting peace. Before we dive in, let me know in the comments, where are you watching this from? I love seeing how far this story reaches. He wanted mornings with coffee on the patio, weekends grilling with family, and afternoons when his nephews could run in the yard without worry. Instead, his backyard fence became the center of a conflict he never asked for. The man at the heart of it wasn't a burglar or a reckless teenager. It was someone who was supposed to keep the community safe. Calvin Swart, one of the HOA's patrol officers. Calvin had developed a habit that made Elvin's stomach tighten every time he heard footsteps near the fence. Elvin called out, "Hey, was there a problem?" Calvin smirked, adjusted his belt, and said flatly, "Just checking the area," before walking off. No apology, no explanation. It felt off, but Elvin brushed it aside for the moment. Maybe this was normal in a gated community. Maybe patrol officers had free range. But then it happened again and again. Nobody says anything. Henry chuckled bitterly, adding, "Yeah, because every time someone complains, the HOA tells us it's for our safety." Safety, my foot. The more Elvin heard, the more it burned inside him. He had worked years for this house. Every paycheck saved, every sacrifice made, it was all for that patch of grass behind his fence. Calvin stopped, turned slowly, and stared at him. "I'm authorized to patrol the community. Don't get in the way." He knew then this wasn't going to stop on its own. Later that night, Elvin sat with his sister Renee over dinner. His nephews were laughing in the next room, playing a video game. Elvin vented his frustration, his voice low, but heated. "I bought this house thinking it would be safe. But how is it safe when some guy keeps hopping my fence like it's a park bench? I've called, I've emailed, I've been polite. And nothing changes." Renee put down her fork, her expression tightening. "You can't let this go on, Dor. It was about dignity. About showing his nephews that standing your ground mattered." Still, Elvin wanted to be fair. He called the HOA office once more, speaking directly with the president, a man named Leonard Briggs. "Look, Leonard, this has to stop. Calvin's trespassing. If he needs to patrol, fine. But not through my yard." Briggs gave a long sigh on the other end. "Mr. Smith, our officers have discretion. If you've got a problem, put it in writing. But I can't micromanage every patrol." He felt the anger, the helplessness, but also something else stirring. A thought he hadn't fully let himself consider yet. If the HOA wouldn't protect his rights, he'd have to find a way to protect them himself. Elvin wasn't the type to yell or make scenes, so he tried every reasonable step first. He began with an email. He sat at his laptop late one evening after work, typing carefully, making sure his tone was respectful but firm. "To the HOA board, I've noticed that Officer Swart continues to enter my backyard without permission. While I understand the need for patrol, this is private property and it's creating discomfort for my family. Please direct officers to use community walkways and not trespass over residential fences. Elvin Smith." The next day he received a short reply from the HOA office secretary. "Your concern has been noted. The patrol team has discretion in their routes." Discretion. That single word made Elvin exhale sharply. A week later, after catching Calvin scaling the fence again, he called the HOA office directly. This time he got through to the president himself, Leonard Briggs. "Leonard, it's Elvin Smith on Hawthorne Drive," he began, trying to keep his voice steady. "We've spoken before, but this is continuing. Calvin Swart keeps hopping my fence like it's nothing. My nephews were in the yard last weekend when he did it. You can't tell me that's appropriate." On the other end, Leonard sighed as if he'd heard it all before. "Mr. Smith, our patrol officers are trained. They're doing their job. If he feels the need to enter, It's within his judgment. Judgment, Elvin snapped, his patience unraveling. What judgment does it take to know that climbing into someone's backyard without permission is trespassing? Look, Leonard said, his tone hardening. File it formally if you want, but I can't tie the hands of our security staff. The call ended there. Elvin stared at his phone, his jaw tight. The message was clear. The HOA wasn't going to do anything. At the next community meeting, he decided to raise it in front of everyone. The room smelled faintly of burnt coffee and carpet cleaner, the kind of space where neighbors usually argued about trash bins and parking spots. Elvin waited for the open comments portion, and then stood. "Good evening. I need to address something that's been ongoing," he said, glancing at the board members. "Officer Swart has entered my property multiple times by climbing over my fence. This isn't once or twice. It's routine. My family doesn't feel safe with it, and it's unacceptable." Murmurs spread through the small crowd. A few neighbors nodded subtly, but others sat stiff, eyes darting between Elvin and the board. Leonard adjusted his glasses and leaned into the microphone. "Mr. Smith, as I told you before, our officers patrol for the safety of the community. I understand your concern, but they must be allowed flexibility." From the back, Janine Morales raised her hand. "With respect, Leonard, I've seen Calvin cutting through yards, too. It's not just Elvin." The board exchanged uneasy looks, but Leonard quickly pressed on. "We appreciate the input, but unless there's evidence of misconduct beyond patrol, the policy stands." Elvin's stomach sank. Even with a witness speaking up, they brushed it aside. After the meeting, as he walked to his car, Calvin himself approached. "You really think you're gonna stop me by whining in there?" Calvin sneered, his voice low and mocking. Elvin froze, turning to face him. "This isn't a game. You're trespassing," Calvin smirked, stepping closer. "I'm doing my job. Maybe you should worry less about me and more about keeping your lawn trimmed." That line stung more than Elvin expected. It wasn't just disrespect, it was humiliation. He clenched his fists, forcing himself to walk away, knowing that if he lost his temper now, it would play right into Calvin's hands. Later that night, he vented again to his sister Renee. She listened quietly, her face etched with worry. "They're not going to help you," she said softly. "They're protecting him because admitting he's wrong makes them look bad. You can't count on them." "So what do I do?" Elvin asked, exasperated. "Let him keep walking in here like it's his playground?" Renee leaned forward, her voice steady. "No, but you can't meet arrogance with weakness. You've got to make a move that forces respect." Her words lingered long after she left. Elvin sat alone on his porch, the desert air cooling around him, staring at the fence that had become a symbol of his frustration. Each time Calvin climbed it, it wasn't just about territory, it was about dignity being stripped away piece by piece. But the next incident, with his nephews in plain sight, would push Elvin past his breaking point and set everything in motion. The heat in Boston that Saturday was the kind that clung to the skin, pressing down on anyone daring enough to stay outside past noon. Elvin Smith had pulled a couple of chairs into the shade of a small patio umbrella in his backyard, watching his two nephews toss a football back and forth on the grass. They were only 9 and 11, full of energy and laughter, their sneakers kicking up bits of dry dirt with every sharp turn. For a moment, it felt like everything was right. This was what he wanted when he bought the house. Space for family, a safe yard for kids to play. He sipped from a bottle of cold water, leaned back in his chair, and let their laughter roll over him like a blessing. Then it happened. The sound of a heavy thud against the fence made Elvin sit up straight. Before he could process it, a figure vaulted over the wooden panels with the ease of someone who had done it dozens of times before. Calvin Swart landed hard in the middle of the yard, his boots sinking into the grass. The ball slipped from Elvin's younger nephew's hands. Both boys froze, staring wide-eyed at the armed, uniformed man who had just dropped into their game as if he belonged there. "Calvin!" Elvin shouted, rising from his chair so quickly it tipped over. "What the hell are you doing?" Calvin didn't flinch. He dusted off his hands, scanned the yard with an air of casual authority, and muttered, "Routine patrol, just making sure everything's in order." "In order?" Elvin's voice cracked with disbelief. He gestured at the boys, who were still frozen in place. "You just scared my nephews half to death. You don't walk into a man's backyard without permission, and you damn sure don't climb over when kids are playing here." Calvin's gaze slid toward the boys, then back to Elvin. "They'll be fine, nothing to worry about." The dismissiveness in his tone made Elvin's blood boil. He stepped forward, standing just a few feet away. "I've asked you to stop. I've spoken to the board. I've done everything the right way, and you're still trespassing like this is your personal playground." Calvin tilted his head, smirking. "Maybe if you weren't so uptight, you'd realize I'm here for your safety." "You ought to be thanking me," Elvin's older nephew whispered. "Uncle Dor, can we go inside?" His voice shook. "Yes," Elvin said firmly, never breaking eye contact with Calvin. "Go inside, now." The boys hurried toward the back door, casting nervous glances over their shoulders. Elvin waited until they were inside, before taking another step closer. "This is the last time you pull something like this, Calvin. Do you hear me? The last time." Calvin adjusted his belt again, eyes narrowing. "What are you gonna do? Write another email? Cry to Briggs at the next meeting?" He let out a short, mocking laugh. "Face it, Smith. Nobody's listening to you." Something shifted inside Elvin at that moment. It wasn't just anger. It was resolve. He realized Calvin was right about one thing. Nobody was listening. Not the HOA, not the board, not even the neighbors who whispered in private but stayed silent in public. If anything was going to change, it wouldn't be because someone in authority decided to help him. It would be because he took action. Calvin hopped back over the fence with the same ease he had arrived, leaving Elvin standing there, fists clenched, chest heaving. The yard felt different now. Tainted. The laughter of his nephews had been replaced by fear, and Elvin couldn't shake the look in their eyes. Later that evening, Renee stopped by to pick up the boys. She immediately noticed the tension in the air. "What happened?" she asked, looking from her brother to her sons. "They don't want to play outside anymore," Elvin said quietly. "Because that man thinks he owns this yard." Renee's face hardened as her sons recounted what happened. "He jumped in while you were playing?" she asked, her voice sharp with anger. "That's it, Dor, you can't let this slide. You've got to make a stand." "I know," Elvin admitted, his voice low. "I've tried every channel. They don't care. He doesn't care. The only way this ends is if I show him I'm serious." Renee studied him, her expression a mix of worry and respect. "Just be careful. Don't give him a reason to twist this against you." "But you're right, this has gone too far." That night, long after his sister and nephews had gone home, Elvin sat alone in the backyard. The desert sky above was streaked with stars, the air cooling into something almost bearable. He stared at the fence, replaying Calvin's smirk, his dismissive words, the fear in the boy's eyes. He thought about every email, every phone call, every meeting where his voice had been dismissed. About Briggs' sigh on the phone, about the neighbors who whispered their frustrations but never spoke up in public. About Calvin's words, "Nobody's listening to you." Maybe nobody had listened before, but they would now. Elvin leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, and made his decision. If the HOA refused to draw the line, he would. He wouldn't raise his voice, he wouldn't throw punches, but he'd make sure the next time Calvin tried to climb that fence, he'd regret it. But before he could set his plan in motion, he needed to figure out exactly how to turn his anger into action, and that meant preparing for a confrontation he knew was coming. The next morning, Elvin Smith woke with a pounding determination he hadn't felt in months. No more waiting for emails that went unanswered. No more being talked down to in meetings. And no more watching Calvin Swart climb his fence as if his property were just part of the patrol route. If nobody else respected the line between public and private, he was going to draw that line himself. The idea came to him while flipping through the channels with his breakfast still half-eaten on the counter. He paused on a show about farming equipment. The narrator mentioned low-voltage electric strips used for livestock. Legal, safe deterrence, more annoying than dangerous. The kind of thing that would sting enough to send a message, but not enough to cause harm. Elvin set down his fork. That was it. That was the answer. That afternoon, he drove across town to a hardware store in Glendale. The place smelled of sawdust and fertilizer, the air thick with the low rumble of forklifts moving pallets in the back. He wandered down the aisles, scanning shelves stacked with tools, wires, and fencing supplies, until he spotted the kit. An electric deterrent system for property lines. As he lifted the box, a store clerk approached. Middle-aged, broad-shouldered, with Calvin stitched across his vest. "Need help with that, sir?" Calvin asked. "Yeah," Elvin said, glancing at the kit. "I've got a fence problem. Guy keeps climbing over it. I'm not looking to hurt anybody, just discourage them." Calvin nodded knowingly. "You're talking livestock-grade voltage, then. Won't do permanent damage. Feels like a nasty static shock. Most folks don't try a second time." "That's exactly what I need." Calvin leaned closer, lowering his voice. "You'd be surprised how many people buy these for neighbors, not animals. Just make sure it's mounted legally. Top of the fence line, marked clearly. That way, if anyone gets zapped, you've covered yourself." Elvin nodded, grateful for the straightforward advice. "Thanks. I'll take it." As he carried the box to the counter, he imagined Calvin's smug expression twisting the moment his hand touched the strip. The thought made something in his chest loosen, a sense of relief he hadn't felt in weeks. Back home, Elvin unpacked the kit on his patio table. He read the instructions twice, careful with every detail. By the time the sun dipped low, painting the desert sky in bands of orange and purple, he had mounted the strip along the top edge of the gate. Clean. Discreet. Perfectly legal. He attached the warning sign to the inside post, where anyone climbing would see it at the last second. Renee called that evening to check in. "What are you up to, Dor?" "Just working on a project," he said. She could hear the determination in his voice. "A project or a plan?" He chuckled, though there was no humor in it. "A plan. Calvin's not getting into this yard again." There was a long pause. Then she said quietly, "Be careful, Dor. Men like him don't take embarrassment well. He's going to push back." "That's fine," Elvin said firmly. "I'm done being ignored. He thinks I'm weak because I don't yell and scream. Let him find out how wrong he is." That night, Elvin sat on his porch with a glass of iced tea, staring at the gate. The strip glinted faintly in the porch light, silent but waiting. He felt calmer than he had in weeks. For once he was ahead of Calvin instead of reacting to him. The next few days passed without incident. Calvin patrolled the neighborhood, his truck cruising past houses, his figure visible on sidewalks. But he didn't enter the yard. Elvin wondered if word had spread, or if Calvin was biding his time. The waiting gnawed at him, but he held steady. On Thursday, as he watered the small row of desert shrubs along his fence, his neighbor Janine stopped by. "Dor," she said cautiously. "You've been quiet lately. Everything all right?" He wiped sweat from his forehead, hesitated, then admitted. "I put something up on the gate. A deterrent. Nothing dangerous, just enough to stop him." Janine raised her eyebrows. "You mean like electric?" "Low voltage," he clarified. "Legal. I had no choice." He wouldn't stop. Her lips curved into a small, approving smile. "Good. Someone had to put him in his place. He struts around here like the rules don't apply to him." She glanced at the fence. "Be ready, though. A man like that. He's not going to like being embarrassed." "I know," Elvin said quietly. "But I'm ready for it." That evening, he settled into his porch chair again. Tea in hand, eyes fixed on the fence. The air was still, the neighborhood unusually quiet, as though holding its breath. He didn't know when Calvin would test the gate, but he knew it was only a matter of time. But when the moment came, it wouldn't just be about a fence, It would be about dignity, about finally drawing a line that no one had the right to cross. Saturday arrived with the kind of heat that pressed down on the pavement and made the air shimmer above the asphalt. Elvin Smith had been up early, mowing the lawn before the sun climbed too high. By late morning, he was settled on his porch with a tall glass of iced tea and a determination to wait. He knew it was coming. Calvin Swart never let more than a week pass without cutting through. The street was still, the only sound the faint hum of a neighbor's air conditioner. Elvin's eyes shifted between the sidewalk and the gate, patient but alert. It was almost noon when he saw it, the white HOA patrol truck creeping down Hawthorne Drive, slowing in front of his property. Calvin stepped out, heavy boots crunching against the gravel shoulder. He looked around casually, as if checking the street, but Elvin recognized the rhythm of a man who had done this 100 times. Without hesitation, Calvin headed straight for the fence. Elvin leaned back in his chair, his heart beat steady, his glass of tea sweating against his palm. He didn't move, didn't call out, didn't warn him. Calvin placed a gloved hand on the wood, then swung his boot into a foothold. In one practiced motion, he hauled himself upward, fingers gripping the top edge of the gate, directly onto the low-voltage strip. The sharp crackle came instantly, accompanied by a yelp ripped from Calvin's throat. His body jerked backward, his hand flying off the gate as if it had betrayed him. He toppled clumsily into the patch of grass on Elvin's side, then scrambled back, clutching his hand. From his porch chair, Elvin finally spoke, his voice calm but firm. "That gate's private property, you were warned." Calvin's face flushed red, a mix of shock and fury. You set this up? You think you can do this to me?" "You did it to yourself," Elvin replied. He took a slow sip of his tea, never breaking eye contact. "I told you to stop coming over my fence. You didn't listen. Now you know I'm serious." Across the street, Janine Morales peeked through her blinds, her eyes widening as she watched the scene unfold. A couple of houses down, Henry Cho stepped onto his driveway, squinting at the commotion. Within minutes, neighbors who had long grumbled in whispers were now spectators, drawn to the sight of Calvin's humiliation. Calvin scrambled to his feet, brushing dirt from his uniform. His voice shook with anger. "This isn't over, Smith. You're going to regret this." Elvin remained in his chair, the picture of composure. "The only thing I regret is having to go this far because you couldn't respect a simple boundary." Henry called out from down the block, his tone edged with amusement. "Looks like the patrol got patrolled today." A ripple of laughter carried through the still air, and Calvin's face darkened further. He stormed back toward his truck, slamming the door so hard it echoed down the street. The engine roared, and the vehicle lurched forward before speeding away, gravel spitting out from the tires. Elvin stayed seated, his pulse finally beginning to slow. The neighbors who had watched scattered back into their homes, but he knew the story would spread quickly. By dinner, everyone in the community would know that Calvin Swart, the man who strutted with authority, had been knocked down by the very fence he thought he could ignore. Later that afternoon, Janine knocked on Elvin's door. She leaned against the frame, arms crossed, a smile tugging at her lips. "You actually did it, huh? I saw the whole thing." He looked like he touched a live wire. Elvin shook his head, exhaling slowly. "I didn't want it to come to this. But he left me no choice." "Don't apologize," Janine said. "You did what everybody else was too scared to do." He had it coming. She hesitated before lowering her voice. "But watch your back, door. He's not going to take that humiliation quietly. Men like him never do." That night, Elvin sat outside again, the desert air cooler now, stars beginning to prick the sky. He thought about Calvin's twisted expression, the anger radiating off him as he drove away. It wasn't just a warning Calvin had received, it was a wound to his pride, and pride was dangerous when bruised. Still, Elvin felt a sense of quiet satisfaction. For the first time, he wasn't the one who felt powerless. He had drawn his line, and Calvin had felt it with his own hand. But Calvin wasn't about to let that embarrassment slide, and the HOA's response would only throw gasoline on the fire. The story of Calvin Swartz's fall from the fence traveled faster than wildfire in the desert wind. By Monday morning, the entire community was buzzing with it. Neighbors whispered at mailboxes, traded versions at the pool, and sent texts that all carried the same headline. Calvin got shocked. Some told it like a comedy, laughing about the look on his face when he hit the grass. Others treated it like a scandal, shaking their heads and warning that Elvin Smith had gone too far. Either way, the fence was no longer just wood and nails, it had become a symbol. 2 days after the incident, a letter arrived in Elvin's mailbox. The envelope bore the HOA's stamp in bold blue, and the paper inside carried the unmistakable tone of authority. Dear Mr. Smith, we have received reports of an unauthorized installation of electrical equipment on your property fence. This action presents potential safety hazards and is considered a violation of community guidelines. You are hereby instructed to remove said equipment immediately. Failure to comply may result in fines or further legal action. Hawthorne Community Board. Elvin stood in his kitchen, reading the letter twice, then a third time. His hands trembled with anger. Unauthorized? Hazardous? He had followed the law to the letter, installed it safely, even posted the required warning sign. What they called a violation was nothing more than him protecting his own property. That evening, he decided to attend the next HOA meeting in person. The community room was crowded, every chair filled, the hum of conversation sharp with anticipation. People weren't there to argue about recycling bins this time. They wanted to see fireworks. Leonard Briggs, the HOA president, cleared his throat at the front. We'll move to new business, he said. We've received reports of a resident installing electric wiring on his fence. This is a serious matter. Elvin raised his hand, his voice steady. That resident is me. The room grew quiet. Eyes turned to him, some sympathetic, others skeptical. He stood, letter in hand. Let me be clear. I didn't install anything illegal. It's a livestock deterrent, low voltage, safe, and marked with a warning. I did it because Officer Dresner has been trespassing on my property for months. I complained. I emailed. I called. Nothing changed. So I protected my home. Murmurs spread through the crowd. A woman in the back said, he's right. I've seen Calvin hop fences too, another man muttered. About time someone did something. Leonard's face hardened. Mr. Smith, regardless of your reasoning, this kind of installation presents liability issues for the HOA. If someone is injured, we are exposed to legal risk. This cannot stand. Elvin's patience snapped. Liability. The only reason anyone was shocked is because your officer broke the law by trespassing. If you had done your job months ago, none of this would have been necessary. Calvin himself was sitting in the second row, his hand still wrapped in a bandage. He rose slowly, his glare fixed on Elvin. You think you're clever, don't you? You humiliated me. You assaulted a security officer doing his job. You weren't doing your job. Elvin shot back. You were cutting corners. You scared my nephews. You treated my yard like your shortcut. That's not security. That's harassment. Gasps spread through the room, the tension thick enough to choke on. Leonard quickly banged his gavel. Enough. This meeting will not devolve into shouting. But the shouting had already begun. Neighbors speaking up from all sides. He's right. Calvin's been in my yard too. My dog went crazy every time he climbed our back wall. Why are we protecting the patrol instead of the people paying HOA fees? For the first time, the power dynamic shifted. Calvin's authority, once unquestioned, was being openly challenged. But Leonard refused to bend. Mr. Smith, he said coldly, you have 1 week to remove the electrical installation. Failure to comply will result in daily fines. Elvin folded the letter in his hands, his jaw clenched. I'm not removing it. Not until you guarantee your officer will stop trespassing. You want to fine me? Fine me. But I won't let anyone scare my family again. The meeting erupted into chaos. Some cheered, others groaned. But one thing was certain. The conflict was no longer just between Elvin and Calvin. The entire community was now divided. When Elvin returned home that night, Renee called. Her voice was sharp with concern. "They're trying to make you the villain, Dor. Don't let them twist this." "They already have," he admitted, pacing his living room. "But I'm not backing down. If they want to fight, they've got one." He hung up the phone and stepped outside, staring at the fence that started it all. The desert air was still, but inside him, a storm brewed. The HOA had chosen sides, and it wasn't his. But Calvin wasn't finished either, and his next moves would turn the conflict into something far darker than neighborhood politics. The days following the HOA meeting felt different. The tension wasn't just in Elvin Smith's house anymore. It was in the air every time he drove down Hawthorne Drive. Neighbors who once waved now paused, uncertain whether acknowledging him meant taking a side. Some offered quick nods of support, while others turned away, their faces tight with disapproval. The community had split into two camps, and everyone knew it. But the one person who wasn't keeping quiet was Calvin Swart. Elvin first noticed it on a Tuesday evening. As he returned from work, he saw the HOA patrol truck parked 2 doors down, engine idling, headlights off. Calvin sat inside, arms crossed, eyes fixed on Elvin's house. He didn't move when Elvin pulled into the driveway. He didn't even pretend to be on a call. He just stared. Later that week, around midnight, Elvin heard the faint crunch of gravel outside his fence. He stepped onto the porch, heart thumping, and saw the beam of a flashlight sweeping across his yard from the street. The light lingered on the gate for several seconds before finally moving on. Renee was the first person he told. "He's not just trespassing anymore," Elvin said over the phone. "He's watching, waiting. You need to document this," she urged. "Get cameras up. Don't give him the chance to say it's just in your head." So Elvin did. He bought a set of motion-activated cameras and installed them around the property, one overlooking the driveway, one facing the backyard, and one directly at the gate. Every beep of the motion sensor became both a comfort and a reminder that Calvin could show up at any moment. One night, as Elvin reviewed the footage, he caught exactly what he feared. At 2:13 a.m., Calvin walked past the gate, slowed, and reached out his hand just inches away from the top strip before pulling it back. He stood there for nearly a full minute, staring into the yard. Then finally walked away. The next morning, Elvin showed the video to Janine Morales. She watched with wide eyes, shaking her head. "This isn't about patrol anymore. He's trying to scare you." "That's exactly what he's doing," Elvin said. "But it's not working." Janine sighed. "Dor, you're strong, but this isn't just about you anymore. Everyone's talking. Half the neighborhood thinks you're standing up for what's right. The other half says you're provoking him. If this keeps going, something's going to break." Elvin already knew that. He could feel it every time he walked out his front door. The air wasn't just heavy. It was charged, as though waiting for a spark. That spark came the following weekend. Elvin was out back trimming shrubs when he heard footsteps approaching the fence line. He turned just as Calvin's head appeared over the top. "You still think you won, Smith?" Calvin sneered. "That little stunt humiliated me. But don't get too comfortable." Elvin dropped the clippers and stepped closer, his voice steady, but sharp. "You humiliated yourself. I warned you. You ignored me. You think this is about pride, Calvin? This is about respect. Something you clearly don't understand." Calvin's lip curled. "Respect? You think anyone respects you now? Half the board wants you fined into the ground. The rest are just waiting for you to slip up. When you do, I'll be right there to make sure it sticks." Elvin's jaw clenched. He wanted to say more. But instead, he pointed at the camera mounted on the corner of his house. Its red light blinked steadily in the afternoon sun. "Go ahead. Keep talking. Every word you say is being recorded. Every time you come near this yard, it's documented. You want to keep playing this game, Calvin? Fine. But the next time you cross this line, you won't just be embarrassed. You'll be exposed. For the first time, Calvin faltered. His smirk flickered, and though he tried to hold his ground, he slowly dropped back to the other side of the fence. His boots crunched against the gravel as he walked away. But the tension hung in the air long after he was gone. That evening, Henry Cho stopped by with a six-pack in hand. "Heard you gave Calvin a piece of your mind again?" Henry said, setting the beer on the porch table. "Good. Somebody's got to. But you know he's not going to let this drop, right?" "I know," Elvin admitted, cracking open a can. "But I'm done letting him think he can control me. If he wants to escalate, then he'll find out I'm not afraid." Henry raised his can in a quiet toast. "Just don't let him drag you down with him. Men like that. They'll burn everything around them, just to win." Elvin stared at the darkening street, sipping his drink. He could feel the truth in Henry's words. The situation was past the point of petty complaints and ignored emails. This was now a battle of wills, and Calvin had made it clear he was willing to play dirty. But Elvin wasn't about to let fear dictate his life. And the next confrontation would prove just how far each man was willing to go. By the time August rolled in, the desert heat wasn't the only thing suffocating Elvin Smith. The feud with Calvin Swart had turned every trip outside into a battle of nerves. The cameras caught him circling, lingering, sometimes just staring. And every night, Elvin lay awake, waiting for the sound of boots on gravel or the scrape of leather against the fence. It couldn't continue like this. One way or another, something had to break. That moment came one Friday evening as the sun bled into the horizon, painting the Boston sky with streaks of orange and red. Elvin had just finished watering his shrubs when he noticed Calvin's patrol truck roll to a stop in front of his house. The engine cut off. The silence afterward was deafening. Calvin stepped out slowly, his movements deliberate. He wasn't in uniform this time, just jeans and a plain t-shirt. But his posture radiated the same authority he always tried to project. He walked straight to the fence and leaned against it, calling out, "Smith, we need to talk." Elvin set the hose down, water pooling at his feet, and squared his shoulders. "About what?" "You've said plenty already." Calvin's mouth twisted into something between a sneer and a smile. "You think you're making me look bad. You think you've won because you shocked me in front of the neighborhood. But let me tell you something. You haven't won anything. All you've done is dig yourself a deeper hole." Elvin stepped closer, planting his feet a few yards from the gate. "No, Calvin. What I've done is make sure you don't scare kids in my yard again. What I've done is remind you that this fence isn't yours to climb. That's not a hole. That's a boundary. And for the first time, you're being forced to respect it." Calvin's eyes narrowed. "Respect? You think anyone here respects you now? Half this neighborhood thinks you're reckless, dangerous even. They'll side with me because they're afraid of what you'll do next." The word stung, but Elvin refused to let it show. "Afraid of me? Or tired of you?" "Because from where I'm standing, the only one causing fear around here is the man who thinks he's above the rules. And I'm not afraid of you, Calvin. Not anymore." For a moment, silence hung between them. The only sound was the distant hum of cicadas in the evening heat. Calvin's fists clenched at his sides, knuckles whitening. He took a step forward, pressing his weight against the fence. "You better be careful," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "Men like me don't forgive humiliation. You've made yourself an enemy you can't handle." Elvin's gaze didn't waver. "You already were my enemy the moment you trespassed into my yard without permission. This isn't about humiliation, Calvin. It's about respect. And I'm not backing down." The standoff stretched, neither man willing to blink. Then from across the street, Janine Morales's voice cut through the tension. "Calvin, we all know what you've been doing. Don't pretend like you're the victim here." She stood on her porch, arms crossed, her voice carrying strong in the evening air. A few houses down, Henry Cho stepped outside too, folding his arms. "She's right. You've been climbing fences and harassing people for months. Everyone knows it. You just didn't expect Elvin to stand up to you. More doors creaked open. Neighbors emerged, drawn by the sound of voices, their eyes shifting between the two men at the fence. For the first time, Calvin wasn't in control. The crowd wasn't murmuring against Elvin. They were watching Calvin, waiting to see how he reacted. Calvin's face darkened. His jaw tightened as the weight of the eyes around him sank in. "You people don't understand," he muttered. But his voice had lost its edge. Elvin took the opportunity, his tone calm but firm. "No, Calvin. We understand perfectly. You abused your position. You crossed boundaries that weren't yours to cross. And now you're angry because someone finally called you out." For a split second, Calvin looked as though he might climb the fence again, just to prove a point. But with half the neighborhood staring him down, he stepped back instead. His truck door slammed shut, and the engine roared to life. He sped off down the street, tires squealing against the pavement. The silence left behind was thick, heavy, but also liberating. One by one, neighbors turned toward Elvin. Some offered small nods of support. Others whispered among themselves. But the message was clear. The balance of power had shifted. Janine crossed the street, her expression serious but approving. "That was the first time I've ever seen him back down. You didn't just stand up for yourself, Dor. You stood up for all of us." Elvin exhaled slowly. The weight of weeks of conflict pressing off his shoulders. "Maybe. But this isn't over. He's not the kind to let things go." Henry joined them, his tone steady. "Maybe not. But he just realized the neighborhood isn't blind. He can't hide behind the badge anymore. If he pushes again, it won't just be you he's fighting. It'll be all of us." Elvin looked around at the cluster of neighbors still standing outside, their faces a mix of relief and curiosity. For the first time, he felt something different. He wasn't alone anymore. But the true turning point was still ahead. And it would come not from confrontation at the fence, but from evidence that no one could deny. The following week carried a strange quiet. Calvin's truck was seen less often on Hawthorne Drive. And when it did appear, it kept to the sidewalks and the main roads. But that silence didn't feel like peace. It felt like the pause before another storm. Elvin knew Calvin was licking his wounds, waiting for the right moment to strike back. What Elvin didn't know was that the neighborhood itself was changing. On Tuesday evening, Henry Cho knocked on his door holding a flash drive. "Got something you should see," Henry said, stepping inside. They sat at the kitchen table, as Henry explained. "I've got security cameras on my garage. The angle's wide enough that it catches part of your fence. I pulled the footage from the last few weeks." He plugged in the flash drive and pulled up the video. Elvin leaned closer as the grainy footage played. There was Calvin, climbing Elvin's fence on multiple occasions. Sometimes in broad daylight, sometimes at night with a flashlight. One clip even showed Calvin pausing in the yard, lighting a cigarette as if he owned the space. "This is it," Henry said, his voice low but firm. "Proof. He can't talk his way out of this." Elvin sat back, exhaling sharply. "I can't thank you enough, Henry. This changes everything." Henry nodded. "It's not just about you anymore. If he gets away with this, then none of us are safe in our own yards. Take this to the board. Force their hand." The next HOA meeting was packed. Word had spread that Elvin had something to show, and curiosity had pulled in even those who usually stayed quiet. The room buzzed with tension until Elvin stood and addressed the board. "I've been accused of creating a hazard by installing a deterrent on my gate," he began, his voice steady. "But what I've been saying from the beginning is simple. Calvin Swart has been trespassing. Not once. Not twice, but over and over. You said I had no proof. Well, now I do." He pulled out a laptop and connected it to the projector. The first clip played, showing Calvin climbing the fence in broad daylight. Gasps rippled through the room. The next clip rolled. Calvin in the dead of night, shining his flashlight over the yard before dropping inside. Then, another. And another. By the fourth clip, the murmurs had turned into open outrage. "This is harassment," someone shouted. "He's abusing his position." Another voice rang out. Calvin, sitting in the second row, shot to his feet. "This is taken out of context. I was checking for security risks." Henry stood from the back, his voice calm, but cutting. "Security risks don't involve smoking in someone's backyard, Calvin." The footage froze on the frame of Calvin lighting up, the smoke curling above his head as he leaned against Elvin's fence post. The image said more than words ever could. Leonard Briggs tried to regain control, banging the gavel. "Order! Order! Everyone settle down." His voice cracked under the weight of the crowd's anger. "We will review this matter." "No," Elvin interrupted, his tone sharp. "You've ignored me long enough. This is the truth. Right here on the screen." Calvin has no respect for this community, no respect for the people paying to live here. "You asked for evidence. Here it is. Now tell me, how do you justify this?" Silence. Even Leonard had no immediate answer. Finally, Janine spoke from her seat. "We can't pretend anymore. Calvin has crossed the line. If the board doesn't act, then we know where your loyalties really are. And it's not with us." Applause broke out. Small at first, then spreading until nearly half the room was clapping, voices rising in agreement. The board members exchanged uneasy glances, realizing they no longer had control of the narrative. Calvin's face flushed a deep red. He muttered curses under his breath, grabbed his bag and stormed out of the room, the door slamming behind him. In his absence, Leonard cleared his throat. "The board will review disciplinary measures. Effective immediately. Officer Swart is suspended from patrol duties until further notice." The announcement sent another wave of murmurs through the room. For the first time, Elvin felt vindication, not just for himself, but for everyone who had endured Calvin's arrogance. After the meeting, neighbors approached Elvin one after another. A woman he barely knew whispered, "Thank you for standing up. We've all been too scared." Another man clapped him on the shoulder. "You did what none of us could. We owe you." Later, as he walked home under the desert night sky, Elvin felt lighter. Not victorious exactly, but relieved. He had drawn his line, defended it, and now the truth was out for everyone to see. Still, he couldn't shake one thought. Men like Calvin didn't simply disappear. Suspension wouldn't erase his anger, and humiliation wouldn't fade overnight. Elvin knew there would be consequences. But for the first time, he also knew he wasn't standing alone, and the final resolution would prove whether respect could truly win over arrogance. The suspension of Calvin Swart was supposed to mark the end of the ordeal, but in gated communities like Hawthorne, nothing ever really ended cleanly. The following days were thick with whispers. Some neighbors speculated Calvin had been fired outright. Others claimed he was planning to sue. A few still muttered that Elvin Smith had gone too far. But the loudest voice, the ones that mattered most, were the ones thanking him for standing firm when nobody else had. On a quiet Thursday morning, Elvin stood on his porch sipping coffee when Leonard Briggs himself walked up the driveway. The HOA president looked tired, the weight of the board's embarrassment dragging at his shoulders. "Mr. Smith," Leonard said, clearing his throat. "I wanted to speak with you directly." Elvin gestured to the porch chairs. "Go ahead. What's left to say?" Leonard sat, adjusting his glasses. The board reviewed everything. The footage, the complaints, the testimonies. Calvin has been relieved of his duties permanently. "We're working on revising our patrol guidelines to make sure nothing like this happens again." Elvin studied him for a moment, then asked, "And what about the fines you threatened me with?" Leonard hesitated, then shook his head. "Rescinded. You acted within your rights. I'll admit, we mishandled this. I mishandled it." His voice dropped lower. "We let Calvin's authority go unchecked. And that was a mistake. The admission didn't erase months of frustration. But it mattered. Elvin gave a small nod. I didn't want a war, Leonard. I just wanted to sit in my own backyard without someone treating it like a shortcut. Leonard exhaled, almost in relief. I understand now. And I'm sorry it took this long for us to act. When he left, Elvin sat for a long while, the coffee cooling in his cup. It wasn't triumph, he felt. More like a release. A loosening of the knot that had been in his chest since the first time Calvin hopped that fence. That evening, Renee stopped by with her boys. They bounded into the yard, tossing the football again, their laughter ringing out like it had months before. Elvin watched from the porch, feeling something close to peace. Renee joined him, leaning against the railing. So it's really over? For now, he said. Calvin's gone. The HOA finally admitted they were wrong. Her eyes softened. You did the right thing, Dor. You showed them you weren't going to be walked over. And you showed the boys what it means to stand up when no one else will. As if on cue, the younger nephew shouted, Uncle Dor, watch this throw. He launched the ball high into the air, his older brother diving to catch it. Both boys laughed as they tumbled into the grass. Elvin smiled. That's all I wanted, for them to feel safe here. The weeks that followed brought small but meaningful changes. New patrol officers were hired, trained with stricter guidelines. They kept to the sidewalks, waving politely as they passed. The HOA installed a hotline for residents to report concerns. And for once, those concerns were taken seriously. But the biggest change wasn't policy. It was people. Neighbors who had once whispered behind closed doors now spoke openly about the importance of boundaries and respect. At the next block gathering, Janine raised a toast. To Elvin, she said smiling. For reminding us that silence doesn't fix anything. You've got to speak up, or in his case, wire up. The group laughed, clinking glasses, the mood lighter than it had been in months. Elvin laughed too, though he quickly added, I don't recommend electricity as a first solution, but sometimes you have to make sure your voice is heard. It was a line that stuck with people, not because of the humor, but because it was true. Respect wasn't given freely. It was earned, defended, demanded when ignored. That night, as he locked up the house and stepped out onto the porch, Elvin looked at the fence one last time. The deterrent strip still lined the gate, though now it felt more symbolic than necessary. The battle was over, but the lesson remained. He thought about the boys. About Renee's words. About the neighbors who had finally spoken up once they realized they weren't alone. And he thought about Calvin. How arrogance had blinded him. How humiliation had undone him. In the end, it wasn't the shock from the gate that defeated him. It was his refusal to respect the simplest boundary of all, someone else's right to peace in their own home. Elvin sat down with a fresh glass of tea. The night air cool against his skin. For the first time in a long time, the yard felt like it belonged to him again. And that's the heart of it. Respect isn't optional. Cross too many boundaries, and sooner or later, you'll face consequences. Protecting what's yours doesn't always mean raising your voice. It means standing firm, even when others ignore you. So if you take anything from Elvin's story, let it be this. Silence lets arrogance grow, but courage sets the limit. And when you set that limit, you're not just protecting yourself. You're teaching others to value their own boundaries too. If you found this story meaningful, don't forget to subscribe. More stories like this are coming, and each one carries its own lesson worth hearing.